شاء الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه مباركا عليه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى وكما ينبغي لجلال وجهه وعظيم سلطانه. الصلاة والسلام على أسعد الخلق وخاتم الرسل محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه التابعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ثم أما بعد. My brothers assigned to me the task of speaking about women and converts in the mosques. I would speak about this from the angle that I'm an expert in, rather than the angles that my sister Sarah and my dear brother are experts in. Their expertise is in the reality on the ground and how we change that. And my work is in the scholarship of Islam. In Islam, the reference of right and wrong is not statistics and is not what the majority says. The majority of the fuqaha could be wrong about some issue. The majority of the attendees of a mosque could be wrong about some issue. The criteria of knowing what is right and what is wrong in Islam is what we call in Arabic ad-dalil, the evidence. The evidence, something from the revealed knowledge that Allah sent to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and that revealed knowledge appears in the ayat of the Quran. When we read that, we understand the tafsir of the ayat and what it means, and in the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, which is the illustration. نزلنا إليك الذكر وأنزلنا إليك الذكر لتبين الناس ما نزل إليهم. So Allah told Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, we sent this Quran to you so that you illustrate to them what it means. So when we talk about mosques, the criteria of right and wrong, of what is wajib, what is required, and what is bid'ah, what is an innovation in the religion, and so forth, is the sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. How was the mosque of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam designed is how it is supposed to be designed in every place and time. Because this is part of al-wahy, this is part of the revelation. وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. Allah said in the Quran, He doesn't speak out of His own whims, He speaks out of revelation. So how did He sallallahu alayhi wasallam design a mosque? And is it impossible to design our mosques in the same way? No. It is technically, technologically, and socially possible. But we prefer to take bid'ah approaches, to take an innovation approach to designing the mosque versus the sunnah approach of designing the mosque. How was Muhammad's mosque sallallahu alaihi wasallam designed? This is the summation of dozens of narrations that show us that the mosque was a rectangle that faced at the beginning Bayt al-Maqdis, Jerusalem, and then eventually they changed the Qibla from one side of the mosque to the opposite side in order to face Mecca. 4 sides, an open area for men and women and children, 3 doors from the 3 sides in which the minbar was not at. So the minbar, let's say here, and 3 doors, and the 3 doors were common for men and women. When it became too crowded, the Prophet ﷺ, towards the end of his life, they suggested for one of the doors to be only for women. Eventually Umar radiallahu anhu implemented that. But the door for women was not allowed for men. Men were not allowed to enter from the women's door. But women were allowed to enter from the other doors, because the other doors are for everybody. Why a door for women? Because the narrations show us that at some point when the mosque was too crowded, it became too uncomfortable for women to go out from the same door with men. So to protect women and so forth, they made a special door for them. So if it's crowded, they have the facility to leave the mosque without being crushed by big men or by other women and so forth. But the other doors were never for men. The men doors is the first bid'ah that we have here in our history. There is no such thing from the sunnah of Muhammad. Allahu Akbar. Okay. The second bid'ah is the design of the mosque itself. The mosque did not have a basement, did not have a balcony, did not have another section. Did they do that technologically? Yes, they did. The Prophet's home, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was 2 floors. When he stayed with Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, we all know that Abu Ayyub was on top and the Prophet at the bottom, and then Abu Ayyub said, no, I will give you the upper floor. So they had several floors. They could build that. They had the ability to dig and have a room as a basement. We call it in this culture basement. They had the ability to have a balcony. The technology was there, but they never did that. And the Prophet ﷺ never ordered for the mosque to have any other space for women other than the mosque, the place for women and children. My sister mentioned converts, and my brother, not only converts, for non-Muslims, when they visited the mosque, read Ibn al-Qayyim, for example, in his long story of the Christians of Najran, when they visited the mosque, and read about the details of the debate. Very interesting. Most interestingly, when I read that story, was when the Christians of Najran had their time for prayers. So they asked the Prophet ﷺ permission to pray in the mosque. So the narrations say, so they prayed facing the east. And then when they finished the prayers, they continued the debate with the children of Israel, at that time the Jews of Medina, in the mosque. And the Prophet ﷺ was kind of moderating that debate between the Christians and the Jews of the time about his role ﷺ as a prophet. You read in the Sunnah that the Ummahat al-Mu'mineen, the mothers of the believers, did i'tikaf in the mosque during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, and eventually after his life ﷺ, they continued to do i'tikaf. We read in the Sunnah about that young African lady who was enslaved by some tribe. Long story, but then she was freed from slavery. She couldn't find a place. She came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, I don't have a place. So he allowed her to put a tent up in the mosque, and she lived in the mosque for several months. Ibn Hazm, for example, a great scholar of Islam, concluded from this that menstruating women with their menses could be in the mosque, based on this evidence of that young lady who stayed in the mosque for months and so forth. We read about Rufayda, one of the female companions, who erected a tent in the mosque, and she was a physician of the time, where she tended to people who were wounded in the battles and so on. Sayyidina Sa'd radiallahu anhu, when he died from Ghazwat al-Ahzab, and eventually when he died afterwards, he was wounded in Ghazwat al-Ahzab and then eventually died. He died in that tent of Rufayda, where she was actually tending to him as a doctor. And the Prophet ﷺ ordered for him to be in the tent so that he could check on him every morning and evening. We read in the Sunnah about the female companions narrating the Quran, first of all, that they memorized from the Prophet ﷺ in the mosque, narrating the hadith about the Prophet ﷺ. In fact, as I mentioned in a previous lecture this morning, in the hadith sciences, Imam al-Dhahabi, for example, said that women never lied about the Prophet ﷺ. When you look in the hadith sciences, there are people who are considered da'if or liars, or people who have issues. But all the women narrators, according to Imam al-Dhahabi, are authentic, because women never lied about the Prophet ﷺ in their narrations. First of all, of course, Ummahat al-Mu'mineen. Allah told them in the Quran, وَاذْكُرْنَ مَا يُتْلَى فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. Allah ordered them to narrate the Quran and the wisdom, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. We read about a masjid that is a very different place from the masjid that we have anywhere in the world. In about half of the masajid around the world, women are not allowed from the door to start with. I have this book that's on the mass booth, if you're interested, called Reclaiming the Mosque, the Role of Women. It's a small book. I wrote about women not being allowed in the mosque in half of the masajid of Muslims. I used to live in London, UK, and you rarely find a mosque in London, UK that really allows women to enter the mosque. Most masajid, in one of the BBC Channel 4 documentaries, they accounted for 800 mosques in London that does not that do not allow women from the door. Brothers only signs kind of thing. And of course, when the Channel 4 made this documentary, it was a big scandal for Islam, for us as Muslims who live there. Why? We're asked everywhere, why don't you allow women to the mosque? Well, the only answer is that this is a bid'ah. This is an innovation, because in Islam proper, when the Prophet ﷺ was in charge, women were in the mosque. There is a misinterpretation of a number of hadith, and I have to also face this in Islamic scholarship, in the issues of women and in the issues of politics and Islam. Those two areas, so many misnarrations and so many misinterpretations. The misnarrations are some funny narrations that sometimes appear in the authentic collections that have political motivations, and it's a long story. But at least in terms of women and the mosque, the misinterpretation here is when the Prophet ﷺ told the female companion, Humayd, صلاتك في بيتك خير من صلاتك في مسجدي. Your prayers at home is better than your prayers in the masjid here, in my mosque here. And there is a story, and there is a misinterpretation in that story. Because if you look, this is the Bukhari and Muslim line that they quoted. But if you look for the rest of the story, what happened with Humayd? Who is she and who is Abu Humayd and what happened? You will find that Humayd was Sa'idiyya. She lived in Bani Sa'ida, Saqifat Bani Sa'ida, outside Medina, beyond that highway that we have today. And she used to walk 5 times to the mosque, a long distance. And her husband did not want her to walk 5 times a day, that long. So she came to the Prophet ﷺ in the other narrations, less famous but authentic too, and told him that my husband and a number of women, our husbands are not allowing us to walk that far to come to your mosque. And he intervened, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to resolve an issue, not to make a rule that women are not supposed to be in the mosque or that their prayers outside the mosque is better. No, this is contrary to the other evidence, the other dalil that we have. He intervened, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to resolve a marital issue and to deal with the case when women have responsibilities at home, that they should not leave these responsibilities, small children, duties to whatever family, and come to the mosque. They are not required to come to the mosque. And that is why, by the way, women are not required to pray Friday, only Friday. But for the other prayers, men and women have the same rule, that they are encouraged to come to the mosque, and the praying in congregation is 26, 27, 28 times better than non-congregation, than praying individually. And the same rules apply for men and women. There is nowhere in the Quran or the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ except for this hadith. Some scholars misinterpreted the hadith and they made a blank statement. And of course, I know that there are a number of narrations that I think are misnarrations and additions from some of the narrators, that Humayd, then afterwards she chose the darkest room in her house in the furthest corner beyond her rooms. But the Prophet ﷺ is not reported to say any of this. This is her choice. She wants to pray in the dark, she can pray in the dark. But the women in general were encouraged to be in the mosque. And we have hundreds of ahadith that show that the female companions were always in the mosque, and in every prayer of Eid and in every prayer of khusuf and kusuf and all sorts of prayers and all sorts of events. And the mosque is not only a place for prayer. That is one of the bid'ahs that we borrowed from other religions. The mosque is now some temple where you only pray. In most of the world, in most of the mosques around the world, is only a temple, and especially in the places that do not allow women to be in the mosques. Mostly the Hanafi parts of the world, the Indian part of the world, the Hanafi part of Africa and the south. London is also Hanafi, and so forth. So in that part, except for the Hanafi version of the Turks, where women are allowed in the mosque, the rest of the Hanafi world, which is about 40% of Muslims, do not allow women to start with, because it's becoming only a temple for people to go and pray, and not a community place, as the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ was. He said, أعلنوا هذا النكاح واجعلوه في المساجد واضربوا عليه بالدفوف. Announce the marriage and celebrate it in the mosque, and play the drum when you celebrate it. Here is a hadith telling us to play the drum in the mosque. There are, of course, the hadith in Bukhari, well known, of Aisha radiallahu anha, when she was behind him, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, putting her chin on his shoulder, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and watching the Africans, she said, or the Africans, she said, who were playing with their spears in the mosque and dancing on the day of Eid, some folklore dancing here that was in the mosque of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You see that in the mosque of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you will find all sorts of activities and all sorts of action that show that you have a community place. It is not a temple. It is not a place only for worship. It is a place for the community to celebrate, to mourn, to connect, to do relief, and so forth. And it is not an excuse that we have relief organizations outside the mosque, that we don't do relief in the mosque anymore. It's not an excuse that we have hospitals and clinics, that we don't have first aid inside the mosque. It's not an excuse. This is the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we need to go back to the Prophet's example and to go beyond all the bid'ahs that were introduced in different times based on interpretations that might have been suitable or might have answered some questions of the time, but are not suitable for today. It is a scandal that our sisters have to be in the basement or in some balcony or in some dingy room somewhere, and some usually non-clean place of the mosque. It is a scandal for Islam, and it is a bid'ah. It is simply a bid'ah. And yes, we can have some line, or perhaps, I don't know, I advise my brothers and sisters always, to have maybe some plants between the males and the females in the mosque, or a little, small barrier if we want to organize the lines in a different way. But for us to put our sisters away is actually finally an image of how we deal with women in Muslim societies, different from how the sunnah is of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Beyond the mosque to some more serious issues, we have major problems when we deal with women's rights in the family law in Islam. I happen to work on that. I'm currently writing a book with a lot of details on that. There are major problems, major bid'ahs when it comes to the family law in Islam and women's rights as wives, as divorcees, the children, the custody issues, the whole concept of divorce as defined in fiqh and so forth. We have major problems with the role of women in knowledge. And during the highest times of the Islamic civilization, it was women scholars who brought a lot of knowledge and a lot of vitality. Every narrator of hadith narrated after a number of mashayikh, of masters, who were women as well. We don't have narrators of hadith today who are women. We have very, very few scholars, and they don't make it, to the Islamic academia and the fiqh councils. It's only the fiqh council of North America, of which I'm a member, where we have 2 female scholars. But I'm on a few other fiqh councils where women are simply not allowed to the fiqh council. Inshallah, with women's scholarship and with our sisters working on issues of knowledge, and with bringing back the masjid to the sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we should be able to open a new frontier for Islam in this part of the world. And we should be able to make more da'wah and should be able to represent Islam in a more authentic way. As our late Sheikh, rahimahullah, Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali used to say, Islam has a very good case, but has very bad lawyers. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.